Hello from Thailand on the 13th of November, Friday the 13th, 2020. I wanted to talk about how this year 2020 vision has been living in Thailand, and to some extent it really has been 2020 clear vision, and I'll explain why. 12 years I've been here, 12 years based in Bangkok, and I think we've had a very strong love affair with Thailand. In particular, Thai language, Thai writing, Thai people, and Thai food, which is usually great fun. And we've also enjoyed the climate, of course, although local people don't enjoy the climate. Now, this year, during the so-called COVID crisis, we have experienced a 180-degree change in relationships with Thai people. So I think hitherto I had a prevailingly friendly, collaborative and informal relationship with Thai people, with some stresses that you would quite frankly expect if you're an expat in a country that's somewhere between a second and third world developing nation, and you have come from a developed nation, and the moral baggage, the societal fabric of those relative backgrounds meeting. However, the tension has mostly been in the background for me, because I've had a very harmonious time here with many Thai friends and not many expat friends. And if I wanted to have Anglophone or Francophone friends or whatever, I would be presumably living in the UK or the USA or France, which I'm not. This year, we've experienced a 180-degree shift in relationships, or I have, and people who report to me daily, expats who report to me daily about this, have experienced that shift, expats from all walks of life. So now, we didn't have a lockdown here as lockdown happened in Europe, but the economic disparity that started to become exponential here 6 years ago just went absolutely off the graph this year during the COVID event, so that many people lost their jobs and livelihoods, including many expats. Many expats became illegal aliens due to having lost everything and being unable to leave. So those expats risked being arrested and caged, and many assaults were carried out on them in custody. So a large number of friends of mine I lost contact with because they did not wish to meet or talk anymore with Western people during a COVID time, due to the administrative propaganda about white people being dirty. And this propaganda, I believe, originates in China, and we are massively under the influence of China at this time. And I understand that expat experiences in China at the moment are, I hear very many similar narratives about those. So, we're not friends anymore, but, Thai friends are still meeting their Thai friends daily. They're not doing social distancing, they're doing social closening. But it doesn't extend to Western friends. The relationship has been cancelled. And then that became a kind of apartheid, where a majority of people wouldn't speak to you or come near to you. And the basis for this apartheid, which has now developed to an extreme situation in normal or working class areas around Bangkok, the basis is that Thailand, which I think had a massive corona influx at the early months of 2020, and still has corona now, has taken a moral high ground as Thailand, because it has promulgated the idea that through hand washing, mask wearing, and physical distancing and social distancing, it has avoided the coronavirus and beat it. And this is the subject of media broadcasts all day, every day, in Thai language, and propaganda everywhere. However, the reality is starkly different. Not only, I think at the beginning of the year we had a massive going and coming from Wuhan, China, here, and I was working in the area where the Wuhan people were coming and going, and I'm sure we had about 100% infection rate with corona here in January, February, and March. And at times I was working in a very densely populated area. Many people were symptomatic, a lot of the people from China were, and certainly many of the Thais, so that I think at that time I was working in a place with upwards of 7,000 people in a square kilometer, and quite empirically, I measured 75% plus of employees being absent from work with quite severe COVID symptoms. So we're not free of that now, but we are claiming that we've had under 60, I don't know, God forbid, 57, 58 COVID-related deaths or concomitant or caused by COVID, we don't know. So it seems that we have dramatically less COVID deaths than usual here, because we always have COVID deaths every year. Coronaviruses are not new. We've been talking about the novel 19 coronavirus, and we're claiming that we've avoided deaths and infections from it. There's been massive hysteria about foreigners, about aliens in the country coming in and spreading COVID, but we're claiming under 60 deaths, which seems to be totally unrealistic. It's also unrealistic to say that we've been hand washing and social distancing. I work in 4 different standard working class semi-suburban areas around Bangkok. I promise you, people don't wash their hands, male or female. After they go to the toilet, they don't wash their hands. They don't cover their sneezing and coughing. They wiping their snot on their hands and on their clothing. As a white person, if you did that, the consequences, I would dread to imagine what they are, because the tenet now for a 70% apartheid, which is now happening in these areas, totally different to central areas like Sukhumvit, where I think the apartheid scenario, I don't even know if you can talk about an apartheid scenario there, as it seems to be orderly and courteous in those type of 5-star expat areas. It seems orderly and courteous, but in normal areas that have been mentioned by numerous bloggers, there is, I would say now, a 70% apartheid situation. You cannot come in this restaurant, you can get lost, I'm going to call the police, rants, yelling, hysteria, no one will sit next to you in a bus, they would rather sit with a group of Thais who have a hacking cough. People have not been socially distanced at all at any time, even though they claim to have been. From March to November, we've had all-night parties in my residential area, and yet at the same time we lambast Western nations for being dirty, because Western media show images of people having parties or refusing to wear masks and so on. Here many people have, maybe everybody wore and almost everybody may still wear masks here in central areas or swanky areas or upper class areas, or perhaps not upper class areas, but let's say expat or international areas. But in these semi-suburban, normal working class workaday areas, mask wearing has been sporadic for months. Although we never had a lockdown, we never had confinement, we have had a massive economic crash, which again stoked bad feeling against expats, because Thais believed largely that expats were receiving a lot of free money from their home countries, and maybe try telling that to a lot of expats who had no salary and ended up homeless and being clandestines. It's clearly not the case. So I think we need to look at these things carefully before we make race wars out of them. So as a matter of fact, we haven't had social distancing at large, and we do have a proliferation of symptoms right now. We do have uncovered sneezing and coughing. I mean, indigenous people here, they don't even cover their mouth, they sneeze, they cough. But if you behave like that as a white person, because you are as a white person, you're being told every day that you're dirty, you don't have the moral high ground. Do you wash at all, white people? And so on. And this is quite an interesting proposition coming from a third world nation with poor hygiene when you're talking about countries like Germany or Scandinavian countries, the UK or America, with its extreme hygiene fetish, particularly around food stuff, but in general, and so on. So this has caused a lot of provocation and dirty protests against white people here, a lot of negative commentary all of the time, demonization of white people, physically distancing whites, excluding them, refusing them entry, and so on. So those blogs were not flashes in the pan, they are day-to-day factors. Again, that's very hard to bear. 180-degree shift in relationships, and expats don't know what to do. People say, well, why don't you just leave? Well, how? You have your life here. You may have, many expats have their family here. How are you going to come back? Your salary is here. Where are you going to go? What's the plan? What are you going to do? You can't just leave, even if you could afford the airfare. Many people have not wished to leave for those reasons. So I hear these reports daily, which are also my personal experience, and we feel very saddened by the massive change in relations. But the double standards are, of course, really predominant at the moment. So what's going to happen going forward, I don't know. We had, of course, the democracy and protest movement this year, which I'm absolutely not free to talk about at all, but it is certainly a movement. Even though I think the Western press hasn't picked up on this at all, it's the type of movement that has never been seen before because of its subject matter. And it is a youthful, Y-O-U-T-H. I didn't say useful, that's not my job to give my opinion about it. A youthful, so young people are driving this movement. So it should be obvious that those people are the future. So their opinion is being heard, and their opinion is radical, and they know what kind of society they want to have. Again, I'm not free to comment about it. So that's been an intriguing movement going on at the moment. Amid this racism and segregation and inward-lookingness and xenophobia, which has been typical of Thailand at this time and of so many other countries across the globe, although I'm sure people's experience is totally different wherever you go according to the culture. And I'm referring to the specific culture that's in place here. Again, in swanky five-star areas here in Bangkok and in many provincial areas, people report to me, and it's also my personal experience, that there is no apartheid, or they have almost no bad feeling. Although, in certain loyalist areas, where large numbers of people are highly opposed to the current democracy movement, in those loyalist, L-O-Y-A-L-I-S-T, so conservative areas, the xenophobia I find to be tangible, but perhaps not offensive. So there's very big differences in your experiences according to what you do. And we don't choose whether to use public transportation in outside central areas, such as buses in particular. There is, of course, a big difference between using the subway and using buses and other forms of transport at the moment. And expat life has revolved around subways and sky trains. But for many expats doing ordinary expat jobs, if you can call them ordinary, I think many of those jobs are quite noble. Those people doing those jobs at this time, they don't have the luxury largely of using a SkyTrain or a BTS or a subway. Many do, and I think perhaps a majority don't. So you can't choose what communities you come into contact with when you live in any given country, right? Unless you really got a golden balls expat job, and I think very few people have got that here in Thailand at the moment, although I do see them and I do meet them sometimes. So I hear stories and opinions from all over the place, including from Thais. I hear their opinions all day long. I hear what they say, I hear what they say to me, what they say at me, what they say with me, and we see people's body language and their throwing of objects, their friendliness, we see their friendliness, we see their physical and verbal aggression and passive aggressivity. So that's what's going on here at the moment. If you want to come into this country, another reason many expats don't leave, their life and their livelihood may be here. As we know, it's very difficult to readjust to whatever country you came from, if you came from a given country, because you may have never had one. You may have been a global citizen, as it were, factor which is grossly underestimated, right? But if you go out of here, you can't get back in, because, unless you can afford all of the quarantining and so on, because you have to block $16,000 in a bank account here for a number of months, or a bank account somewhere, I don't know where. You have to prove that you've blocked the money in the bank account. This has been cracked down on for years, this type of regulation, so that you can't get around it. So that's 500,000 baht, $16,000. You have to block it. You have to prepay accommodation. You have to do various COVID testing, of course, and you have to do 2 weeks of quarantine in a hotel under surveillance. It's at least $2,000, let's call it 3,000, given the kind of expenses that you have if you're in a hotel. So who is going to come here and tour here on that millionaire's kind of visa? Because we've expressed a desire that we only want upper-class tourists. As we don't have the infrastructure for them, the tourist industry infrastructure is anyway largely permanently closed down now due to the economic crisis, particularly concomitantly with the pandemic. So what are these millionaire tourists or returning expats going to come here and do when you're not welcome at large in standard areas of Bangkok, at least, and there is nothing to do because the country focused on cheap tourism for decades and did it very well. Now it aspires to have upper-class tourism by offering millionaire visas. But who are these millionaires who have time and money to come here and do what exactly? So those are the conditions for coming in the country at the moment, which is another reason many people don't leave. So for work permit and various visa holders, I understand you clearly can come back into the country, and I know many people who have and have undergone quarantine, of course, as aliens, whereas local Thai people were not required to undergo quarantine, even though we're coming out of the same place, of course. So this is the situation we have at the moment. So I don't know where that's going at all, but if you know where that's going, please let me know, and please let me know where things are going in the jurisdiction where you are also. Thank you very much.